So great to see you. So glad that you all are joining us. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Please hit the notifications bell so you get informed the next time we want to do one of these. Such a global audience that we have. We have people watching right now, I can see in the chat, who I know are in Australia. There are people watching right now who I know are in Western Europe. There are people all across the United States tuning in. We just started 36 seconds ago. And look at that. The whole world is watching. Texas, Chicago. Wow. We have something very, very, very special here. We really do. We really have something quite amazing here. So if you're part of this, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank you. Being part of this community, supporting this community. Some of you have stepped up and joined the Patreon. Some of you have stepped up and sent contributions to the John Brown volunteers. Thanks to all of you. Really, this is a joint effort. I am the guy sitting here in the middle of the afternoon in my office in Manhattan talking into my iPhone camera, but this is really a joint effort. Every stream, the whole second half is just me answering your questions, and sometimes you guys ask damn good questions. You ask damn good questions. Am I allowed to curse like that? Am I gonna go to robot hell like on Futurama? I don't know. But yes, sometimes you guys get me going, you ask good questions. I've always divided our audience on here. For those of you who haven't heard, I've always divided our audience into three categories. We have fans, people that love what we do here, city builders, people that are part of our lovely community, people who want a government of action that fights for working families. You guys are great. A lot of you are mods. If you're around long enough and you're a good, trustworthy person, I'll make you a mod. You're awesome. Glad to have you here. And then we do get our share of haters, right? We get people who come on here and are trying to stir up trouble, and sometimes they're trolling and arguing with everybody, and sometimes, writing it down, sometimes they're on here hate watching and trying to refute what I'm saying, and sometimes they're whatever. We have the fans, we have the haters, and then we also have the lurkers. The lurkers. Those are the ones who just watch. They are the ones who just watch, and sometimes they're not watching this live. You have to remember there are thousands of people who watch this afterwards, so they can't comment in the chat because they're not here while we have it. I try to do this at a variety of times, afternoons, late at night. It's been a while since I've done one in the morning. Every so often I might want to do one. I try to do these at different times that are convenient for different people. But there's a lot of people who watch it afterwards, and there's a lot of people who watch it live, but they just watch. They just watch. And those silent members of this community are probably, I would say, the most important. No offense to you fans, no offense to you haters, but the silent ones, the ones who are watching this and digesting it, but saying nothing, you are the most important. Because I know what the fans think, and they're predisposed to like me because they are fans. And I know what the haters think. No matter what I say, they're going to hate me. But you lurkers who watch and say nothing, you are who I should be aiming to convince and win over. I should be trying to win the lurkers to be fans, because you are the most important. The most important category of viewer is the lurker, the one who watches but says nothing. You are the most important. So it is with you in mind that I do these presentations. Sure, I see what the fans say, I see what the haters say, but it's with you in mind, lurker. It's with you in mind that I do these presentations. And it's hard to do it with you in mind because I don't know who you are. I don't know who you are, Mr. Lurker, Mrs. Lurker, Ms. Lurker. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you think. All I know is that you're watching and saying nothing. And it's my job to bring you into this community. It's my job to get you to see that this is a safe place where you can come on and express yourself. I have to bring Bill Clinton here. It's a safe place. Monica Lewinsky, I never had sexual relations with that woman. It's a fun place. I can bring you in here. It's a fun place, and I have to get you lurkers to feel like this is a safe place for you to go. So it is with you lurkers in mind that I proceed with today's presentation. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. The way we do it here is I give my opening remarks, and then after that, I then do the roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions until the super chat questions run out. And when those super chat questions run out, at that point, the show is over. The show concludes. So that's why the super chats are important. So keep those super chat questions rolling in. If you send me a super chat, I will give you an answer. It may not be the answer that you want. May not be the answer that you want, but it will be an answer. You will get an answer if you send me a super chat, but it may not be the answer you want. I always have an answer, but it is not always the correct answer. It is not always the answer that will most satisfy you. But I do my best because I love you all. And I'll be real. I obviously love my fans. We have this energy where I feed off them and they feed off me, and we have a great product that comes out, a great stream, great content happens because of the fans. We do that. You haters, you can be awesome too. You can be really awesome too. I mean, that time that Sticks and Hammer piled all of his people onto my stream, that was awesome. Every so often we get a dumb Vosh fan or a red-brown conspiracy theorist or a libertarian who comes in here, and that's awesome. That's awesome. So I love the haters too. But you lurkers, I love you most of all. I'm Bill Clinton, and I love you lurkers most of all. You're great Americans. You really are. You're great people. And I want to make you lurkers into fans. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm Bill Clinton. Monica Lewinsky and I did not have relations. I love Hillary Clinton. I know you believe that is impossible, but that is the truth. That is the truth. All right. Marxism, rip-off Christianity. So, like I said, opening remarks. Then, from there, roll call. And then, from there, answering super chats. And that is how the show goes. And that is how the cookie crumbles. That's how we're going to do things here. So I will jump in to my opening remarks. Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo will no longer be the governor of my state. Within the next 14 days, he will be stepping down. Andrew Cuomo will no longer be the governor of my state. Well, see ya. I was skeptical. I will admit I was skeptical. I did not think it was going to happen. That man is the New York City machine. His father was a very important politician. He's well embedded in local politics in New York City and New York State, and I thought there was no way Andrew Cuomo's ship would sink. I thought he was like the Titanic, that he was unsinkable, and he was like the Titanic in that people thought he was unsinkable, and he hit an iceberg called his own promiscuous, inappropriate sexual harassment, predatory behavior, and that iceberg sunk Andrew Cuomo. What a day. What a day. Now, there are a couple layers to Andrew Cuomo. Yang rebound. A couple layers to Andrew Cuomo we can discuss here. Layer number one is that he very much reeks of everything that people hate the Democratic Party for. The Democratic Party has always been the party of urban political machines. Go back to the Rizzo machine of Philadelphia. That's an example. The Daley machine of Chicago. And we had the original political machine here in New York City. We had the infamous Tammany Hall machine. It was called Tammany Hall. It was a building, an exclusive place where people could go, Tammany Hall. And that's where the New York City Democrats, that's where they gathered and made their plans. That's where Boss Tweed had the pecking order. That's where it happened. That's where New York City politics was hashed out. And this goes back to the time of Thomas Jefferson. Right? The Democrats are the party of Thomas Jefferson. You had the Democratic Republican Party of Thomas Jefferson. The Democrats are the oldest political party in the United States, the oldest political party that's still around. The Democrats. They were the party of Thomas Jefferson. They were the party of Andrew Jackson. They were the party of Jim Crow segregation. And they were the party of corrupt urban machines. Mass mobilizations to rebuild Christian communists in history. That's the Democratic Party. I once heard a family story. My mother, who I don't talk about my family members, my relatives on here, but for those of you who have been on here long enough, every so often I will drop a little mention. My mother is a librarian, right? I've talked about that. One of the first political things I ever did was when I was a fourth grader, I walked the picket line with my mother and other Stark County librarians in Stark County, Ohio, when they went on strike as members of the Service Employees International Union. So my mother is a librarian. That is a fact. Don't want to say too much more about her or any other relative of mine because I'm not on here to, talk about my family, but I do talk about the fact that my mother was a librarian. And my mother was a librarian. And at one point, early in her life, before she was married, before she went, long before I was around, my mother was a librarian in urban Philadelphia. This was during the 1970s. In urban Philadelphia, my mother was a librarian working in Philadelphia. And she told the story, she will never forget, of how the library that my mother worked in the 1970s in Philadelphia was a voting place. It was where people would go to cast their ballots on election day. A lot of libraries around the country serve as voting booths, right? They're neutral, right? Churches are often polling places, churches, schools, libraries. Well, they set up voting booths in this public library in Philadelphia that my mother worked in. And there was a big scandal at this public library in Philadelphia because the voting machines, the way they were set up, you voted by pulling levers, right? This is an interesting type of voting machine. Every time I've gone to vote, you either do it by pencil, you write it in, or you punch it. You have a punch card, but in Philadelphia at that time, you pulled the lever for the candidate that you preferred. My mother says she will never forget how election day came around, and on the ballots in Philadelphia, they had a Democrat lever to pull, click, you could pull for the Democrat, or they had a Republican lever to pull, click for the Republicans. And in Philadelphia, election day came around, there was a little bit of a scandal because all of the levers for the Republicans were glued down. One could not pull the lever to vote for the Republicans. It was glued. Somebody had gone and super glued the levers, so they were stuck. That was the corrupt urban political machines of the Democratic Party. You want to talk about obvious vote rigging? That's how much it was pretty much rigged. The levers were glued down. You could only pull the Democrat lever. You could not pull the Republican lever. You want to talk about election fraud? That's election fraud, my friends. That was something special. And if anyone who's ever lived in an urban center in the United States has a lot to complain about. Ticket fixing, building inspectors, construction projects. Right? I'm here in New York City. There have been certain parts of this city's roads that have been in repair the entire time I have been here. I moved to New York City in 2010. I have been here, it'll be 11 years now. There have been certain street corners and roads that have constantly been under repair. And that sucks for all of us because there's a road that, you can't, the asphalt isn't good or it's whatever. But it doesn't suck for the guys who are getting paid to fix the road all this time. And it doesn't suck for the guy who arranges for that road to constantly be under repair. Yeah, that is the urban political machines. And Andrew Cuomo is very much a symbol of that machine. And to be fair, Donald Trump, countries, nated homelessness. Donald Trump is very much a product of those machines as well, right? The reputation of Donald Trump's father was a crooked landlord in New York City, a long-time slum landlord who practiced racial discrimination in his renting of his properties and in his real estate markets. And Donald Trump was known to have kind of a corrupt relationship with some organized crime and with the labor unions. And, if people were going up against Donald Trump, they might have union trouble. One story that many people have told is that Donald Trump had a reputation for not paying people, right? If Donald Trump hired you, if you were a craftsman, if you baked cakes or you hung draperies or you did work for Donald Trump, Marxists understand modernity. If you hung draperies or you did craftsman-like work for Donald Trump, it was understood that in order to get paid, you had to file a lawsuit. Now, once you sued him, he would pay you. But he understood that not everyone was going to sue him. And that was Donald Trump's reputation. He was known that basically if you're going to do work for him, he's going to try to avoid paying you. And you're going to have to take him to court for him to pay you. And that was, and see, this is the thing about capitalism, is that is awful. That is reprehensible, right? If I knew someone treated their employees or their contractors that way, I would be disgusted with them. I would say, what kind of person are you? That someone comes, they labor for you, and then they don't pay you, and they have to then go out of their way to hire a lawyer to file a court lawsuit, and then you go, okay, what kind of person is that? That's reprehensible, dishonest behavior. That's what it is. I mean, it's just not how moral, ethical people act. But if you want to get ahead in capitalism, you want to become a big capitalist, you want to become a big real estate giant like Donald Trump, that's the kind of BS that you pull. And that is very much the logic of capitalism. The dog-eat-dog world, might is right. Try to get away with every swindle and scam that you can. The rules are made for the fools. What are you, a Boy Scout? You think there's right and wrong in this world? What's wrong with you? That's kind of the mindset. That's kind of the mindset. And people who act the way Donald Trump acted, they get to be president. They get ahead in this world. And people who think, my goodness, I have an obligation to treat my fellow human beings with decency and kindness, people like that are perceived of as weak. Sounds a lot like ContraPoints, doesn't it? That sounds a lot like ContraPoints' latest video. She goes on this whole rant about Nietzsche and slave morality. She could have talked about Karl Kautsky and the scientific Marxist understanding of the origins of the Christian religion. But why do that when you can promote postmodernism, right? But enough about ContraPoints. I've beaten up on her enough today on my Twitter page. I did that whole stream the other night, so we'll put ContraPoints back. We'll put her in a drawer and just leave her there for now. We're not going to jump on top of ContraPoints anymore, but enough about that. But that's very much the atmosphere. And what's different about the Democratic Party is since the 1930s, the Democratic Party has emphasized kind of an economic populist message. They were, after all, the party of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the party of labor unions at that point. And then, especially since the 1960s, since the fall of Jim Crow segregation, since Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, since then, the Democrats have been, the party that is less racist, the party that tends to talk about issues that are important to African Americans and ethnic minorities. Now they're the party that's much less Islamophobic and friendly to the Muslim community. They're the party that is less sympathetic to Israel and Zionism, even though it started out that the Democrats were more pro-Israel. When Israel started back in 1948, it was Republicans and conservatives who were critical of Israel, and it was Democrats who were big supporters of Israel. And what's interesting is that the Communist Party of the United States were actually big supporters of Israel. And when Truman was creating Israel, the Communist Party had protests against Truman, not for doing it, but because he wasn't doing it enthusiastically enough. So it's really weird when Israel, you have to remember when Israel began in 1948, when Israel was founded, it presented itself like it was going to be a big socialist commune in the desert. Right? Israel was going to be this left-wing progressive country with kibbutzim and the Labor Party, and the Soviet Union was very key in helping to create Israel. And Israel was marketing itself to the world as a left-wing project, right? A country for this marginalized, oppressed group. Millions of them were just killed in the Holocaust, and they're going to get their own country, and they're going to share everything. And they used to talk about how like hippie kind of beatnik people, young people that were kind of socialists and left-wing revolutionaries used to walk up and down the streets of Manhattan selling trees in Israel. That used to be a thing in New York City. If you were walking around, in the 1950s or 60s, it was very likely that a young person would stop you and say, would you like to buy a tree in Israel? And that was a thing. Buy a tree in Israel was a big fundraiser for Israel, that young people who were usually leftists and socialists would walk up and down the streets of New York selling trees in Israel. Israel at that point, and the Democrats were more supportive of Israel at the beginning. It was Republicans, especially like the old John Birch Society, paleo-conservative types who were skeptical of Israel. But now we're in a situation where the Democrats are more critical of Israel, and it's Republicans and evangelical conservatives who are big supporters of Israel. But it's quite interesting because many New York City Zionists, many Zionists who live in urban areas, the majority of Zionists in the United States, the majority of Israel supporters, I will add, are not Jewish. They are Christians. They are conservatives, and they live in red states. The majority of Israel supporters, that's what Zionist means, is Israel supported. The majority of Zionists in the United States are Christians, not Jews, who live in red states and are conservatives. But New York City Zionists, that's a different flavor of Zionism. They are not aware of this. And in fact, I've had many New York City Zionists inform me that everyone in Ohio thinks that Jews have horns and tails. Did you know that? I'm from Ohio. I grew up in Ohio, went to school in Ohio, went to college in Ohio. But apparently, according to many New York City Zionists, all people in Ohio think that Jews have horns and tails. Did you know that? I didn't know that. New York City Zionists apparently are very familiar with what people in Ohio believe. But regardless, the majority of Israel supporters in the United States at this time are evangelical conservatives in red states. And they are Christian, not Jewish. Interesting fact. But the Democratic Party is historically associated with the urban political machines. Tammany Hall in New York City, with the Rizzo machine in Philadelphia, with the Daley machine in Chicago, with the really corrupt and shady political machine of San Francisco. Read about Dianne Feinstein and her origins, and Reverend Jim Jones, the Kool-Aid Man, and Harvey Milk, and how he was assassinated along with Mayor George Moscone right after the Jonestown thing, and Nancy Pelosi, and the more you read about the Democratic Party, as much as the Democratic Party, you can argue that their policies are policies that might be slightly better for working people. They at least, mouth support for the labor movement. They mouth anti-racism. The Democratic Party is a party that is notorious for corruption, whereas the Republican Party is a party that is notorious for deranged fanaticism. The Republican Party is the party of evangelical Christians who think the end times are coming, and this is the Battle of Armageddon, and they want to outlaw Islam because it's an evil terrorist religion, and the Republicans believe that you should privatize everything, and if we just got rid of the minimum wage, everyone would have a job. Don't you know it's true? I read it in a Milton Friedman book. Republican Party, they really believe what they're saying, but what they're saying is nuts, right? What they're saying is nuts. They are doctrinaire neocons, free marketeers, evangelical, Protestant fundamentalists, fanatics. They believe in free market, neoliberal capitalism. They believe in neoconservative foreign policy largely, and they truly believe what they are saying. They truly believe what they are saying. But what they are saying is utter nonsense. And that's the difference. You can trust a Republican. They'll be honest with you and tell you the evil things they plan to do and why they believe they're good. The Democrats will talk one way and tell you something different. I don't know if folks recall the debate that took place between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke is the rising Democratic Party superstar of Texas. Beto O'Rourke, right? And, Beto O'Rourke is hip and cool. He stands on top of things. Did you know that? I mean, it's this hip, cool thing he does. When you have a house party for Beto O'Rourke, he stands on top of your living room table. It is so badass. He stands on top of things. It is like, wow. And he's young and he's hip, and he talks with this young, hip voice. Hey, man, I'm Beto O'Rourke. I used to be part of an internet hacker group when I was a teenager. Beto O'Rourke wants you to think he's really cool and hip, and he's a Democrat, and he wants to legalize weed, and he wants to, Beto O'Rourke. Well, Beto O'Rourke, even though he uses a Latino nickname, Beto is the Latino nickname for Roberto. He's as white as they come. He's O'Rourke. That's about as Irish and white as they come, but he uses Beto to prove he's like Latino or something. And there you go. But Beto O'Rourke was debating Ted Cruz. I'm Ted Cruz. I love America. Communism. It's never worked. He was debating Ted Cruz. And towards the end of the debate, Ted Cruz said, Beto, you're a socialist. You're a socialist. I think that you really believe what you are saying. I think you really do believe what you're saying. And I respect that you really believe what you're saying. And Beto was like, yes, I really do believe what I'm saying. I'm Beto O'Rourke. I'm so cool. But the Bernie Sanders Democrats, your typical rank and file Democrat, is a Bernie Sanders type of person who really believes what they are saying. They really want jobs for all. They really want health care for all. They really want an expanded welfare state. But everybody knows that the Democratic Party is rigged to make sure that people like that don't get into power, right? People like Andrew Cuomo get into power. People like Nancy Pelosi get into power. People like the Clinton family get into power. And thank you, Mateo, for your super chat. Vamos gorillas. That the Democratic Party is rigged to make sure that people who really believe what you're saying, people who really believe what they are saying, don't get into power. That's how the Democratic Party works. But I am convinced that what's going on with Andrew Cuomo right now is a continuation of a process that really started in the 1960s. I would argue that within the Democratic Party, since the 1960s, since the rise of the New Left, since the fall of the Kennedys, there have been two forces pulling on each other: urban political machines and the synthetic left. The corrupt urban political machines on the one side and the synthetic left on the other. And if you really want to go out on a limb, over here there was the working class and the labor movement, but they're pretty much pushed out of the picture. They're not a factor, really. They're too weak at this point. The labor movement is too weak. Corrupt urban political machines serve themselves. They're nepotistic. They serve themselves. People need a job. It's a family business. Nancy Pelosi's whole family have been in that machine for a long time. Cuomo's family have been in the machine for a long time. Biden's well-connected, and that the urban political machines, they serve themselves, right? They want more social programs to some degree or other so that they can, give jobs to their friends and hand out the loot, right? They're just corrupt, bureaucratic entities that serve themselves, okay? And they might favor more social programs, kind of, not really. Are they going to go out and fight for the working class? No. Are they going to, fight for national health care? No. But they don't want a complete libertarian model, because more money, more poverty programs, etc., means that they get to hire more of their friends to work at those poverty programs, to get big fat paychecks, to hire and contract out their friends' businesses, the crony capitalism, etc. Urban political machines like that because it makes the urban political machine bigger. So there's that. But they don't really have an agenda. At the end of the day, the urban political machine folks don't care. They just don't care. Nancy Pelosi does not care. I'll never forget when I was in Philadelphia at the Democratic National Convention in 2016, I sat in the lobby of the hotel where the whole Nancy Pelosi family was sitting there. And I was there. I don't know why I was allowed to be there, but I sat there, and there was Nancy Pelosi's uncle and Nancy Pelosi's cousin and Nancy Pelosi's sister-in-law's sister-in-law and sister-in-law. And I sat there in this hotel lobby drinking unnamed diet beverage and listening to these people and listening to them talk, listening to the Pelosi's talk, the distant relatives of the Queen of Congress talk, and these people do not care. I haven't read that book, Guy. I have not read the book Society of Spectacle. I haven't read it. These people don't care. They don't care. And the same with the Cuomo family. I've never been in close proximity to them. They don't care. They do not care. They don't care. Jimmy crack corn, and they don't care. They could care less. This is their gig. This is their family. It's their entrenched power. If you tried to take it away from them, they would care really quick, and they would make sure that but they don't care. But Bill Gates cares. Bill Gates cares. Jeff Bezos cares. The Council on Foreign Relations cares. There are some very sinister forces that care a lot, that have been sitting around strategizing how to manage capitalism in a state of decay. And those people care. And they care in a very, very scary way. And I am convinced that right now, Andrew Cuomo, Gavin Newsom, and many of the machine Democrats around the country are being swept away to make way for some folks who do care, who really do care, but in a very, very, very dangerous way. In a very dangerous way. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger, Marilyn Ferguson, the spiritual advisor to Al Gore, who visited the Clinton White House, the Stanford Research Institute of California, where all kinds of CIA research is carried out, the Silicon Valley elite, the Rockefeller Malthusians. These people care. Oh, they care. Oh, you can be sure those people care. They care a lot. And they care in a very scary, dangerous way. Those forces emerged during the early 60s. They emerged and they battled for control of the Democratic Party. They battled for control of the Democratic Party. And they published a document, and really it was the Trilateral Commission of Zbigniew Brzezinski, paid for by the Rockefellers, that published a lot of their documents. And on top of that, it was the Jimmy Carter presidency that was the opening shot fired by these people. Jimmy Carter came in, and Jimmy Carter was not Lyndon Johnson. He was not John F. Kennedy. He was not Harry Truman. Jimmy Carter was an ideological Democrat, right? The Roosevelt Democrats, they were populists, and so borderline social democrats, labor activists, they really, the Roosevelt wing was purged during the McCarthy years. The Communist Party was driven out. The labor leadership was purged of people who'd been friendly with the Communist Party. Alger Hiss was thrown in jail, and in the 50s, the Democrats purged the social democratic, labor-oriented progressives. Henry Wallace ran for president in 1948. They were the first ones to go. And after that, you had the urban political machines. Lyndon Johnson was a political machine Democrat in Texas, right? Lyndon Johnson was, he was corrupt as they come. He knew how to get his way with people. You want to talk about sexual harassment? Lyndon Johnson was he was famous for sexually harassing his employees. Lyndon Johnson, he was a Texas Democratic Party. His nickname was Lynching Baines Johnson. And actually, he sexually harassed other men in order to bully and intimidate them by exposing himself to them. You can look this up. He would expose himself to other men to humiliate them. It's some real crazy stuff, right? Back then there was not, any awareness around homosexuality. And if he didn't like you and he wanted to intimidate you, he would expose himself to you. You can read about this. Lyndon Johnson was an awful person. When he didn't like somebody, he would drop his pants and ask you, inappropriate questions. You want to talk about some high-level bullying. You want to talk about sexual assault, right? No one accuses Cuomo of doing anything that gross and disgusting. That's what Lyndon Johnson did. He was a ruthless fellow. The Kennedy family, right? The Kennedy family, the wealth of the Kennedy family in Boston politics came from organized crime. They were the illegal whiskey smugglers and alcohol smugglers, during the Prohibition period. An Irish Catholic family in Boston that was very, very mobbed up, very tied to organized crime, and that was the Kennedy family. And Harry Truman, former Ku Klux Klansman from St. Louis, Missouri, tied in with all kinds of St. Louis, Missouri nonsense. These were machine Democrats. These were bureaucratic Democrats. They purged the Democrats, the socialistic, Rooseveltian, Popular Front Democrats. They got rid of them during the McCarthy period. And then you had the urban machines. But then it was the CIA, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, during the 1960s that funded the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, that set up the Ford Foundation to start funneling money to intellectuals and dissidents, set up the Institute for Policy Studies, set up all kinds of think tanks and institutes to try and change American politics. And really, since the early 60s, there has been a fight between the old corrupt machines, that are self-serving, and this sinister true believers, this true believer apparatus of very, very, very dangerous people. Very, very dangerous people. And, the new left, you can call it, the synthetic left. The folks, one of their central beliefs is overpopulation. There are too many people in the world, and we need to reduce the human population drastically. That is one of their central beliefs. The Club of Rome published a manifesto in the early 1970s called The Limits to Growth. And they argued that human beings, there's too many of us, we drastically must reduce consumption, drive down the human population. Then you had the Jimmy Carter White House, and they came in and they published the Global 2000 report, making the exact same arguments. Too many people, drive down living standards. It was Jimmy Carter who brought in Paul Volcker, a neoliberal economist figure, to come in and overturn all regulation of the lending of money on a local level. With the federal government's authority, the Carter administration went in and they prevented. It used to be different states had what they called usury laws that told banks that they couldn't lend money over a certain rate. Well, Jimmy Carter brought Paul Volcker in, put Paul Volcker in charge of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, and they overturned all of that. Jimmy Carter, he also notoriously is the one who then launched Abscam, right? Very famous Abscam. Abscam was this operation where the FBI had some guy dress up like a Middle Eastern sheik and go around and try to bribe some of these urban Democrats who got in the way of what the Carter administration wanted. Urban Democrats who wanted to build nuclear power plants and worked with labor unions. Usually they were in New Jersey, New York area, and they got this guy dressed up in a Middle Eastern outfit to try and bribe them. And in one case, the politician pushed the suitcase away and said, "I don't want your money." They still convicted him, kicked him out of Congress. Abscam. And it was the FBI, in coordination with the Carter administration, crushing the labor wing of the Democratic Party. It was ruthless. Meanwhile, Carter was all about being the peace president, right? He decreased military spending. Meanwhile, he cultivated the use of counter gangs around the world. Brzezinski, set up the Afghan trap and got the Soviet Union into a situation where it felt it had to intervene in Afghanistan, and then had Osama bin Laden and Saudi Arabia all set up to start an Islamic insurgency in Afghanistan. And in Nicaragua, they had the Contra War, right? When the Nicaraguan people overthrew capitalism and established a socialist government with the Sandinistas, Brzezinski and all of them were ready to start the Contra War in Nicaragua. And Jimmy Carter kept, cultivating the U.S. public to believe that wealth is bad, that economic growth is bad, that they deserve to be poorer, they should be poorer. At the time, there was a fuel crisis, and the cost of heating gas was through the roof. So what did Jimmy Carter do? Did he come in and freeze the price to protect Americans? No. He got on TV, "I am putting on a sweater. Instead of turning up the heat, my fellow Americans, y'all ought to put on a sweater. I am going to wear a sweater because I am the president of the United States. I'm Jimmy Carter, and I'm going to wear a sweater. And Jimmy Carter wore a sweater. And when the economy was tanking under Jimmy Carter, he got on TV and he gave this horrible speech called the Malaise speech, where he said, owning things and having things cannot bring you happiness. You have too much. You shouldn't want so much. You used to have a job, it paid you too much. Why do you think you need good wages? It was the beginning of the fight between the Ford Foundation and Brzezinski and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Eastern establishment with their long-term Malthusian soft power agenda for transitioning not just the United States, but the whole world to a low-wage police state, driving down living standards, reducing the human population, scientifically managing the rolling back of history in the hopes of preserving the rule of Western capitalism. And the machine Democrats, who just exist. Now look, I believe the allegations against Cuomo. I think he did everything he's accused of doing. Okay? Now compared to what Lyndon Johnson did, it's not anywhere near as bad as what Lyndon Johnson did, okay? But I believe Andrew Cuomo did exactly what he's accused of. I think he flirted with that woman and told her that he wanted to sleep with anyone over 22, and I think that he, kissed women against their will unconsensually. I think he touched that woman's exposed bare back. I think that he did everything he was accused of doing. I don't think he's innocent for 1 minute. But you know what? I believe most of the allegations against Joe Biden also. I believe Tara Reade. I believe all the videos I've seen of Joe Biden being creepy and kissing little girls in that creepy way. I believe it. There's a reason that the allegations against Joe Biden are not getting celebrated. The allegations against Cuomo have kept going long enough that Cuomo is stepping down. There's a reason. Look, you have to admit, as much as sexual harassment is atrocious, and as much as it's a good thing that we are now aware of it, and that's a very good thing, right? Imagine, sexual harassment hurts everyone. Obviously, the primary victim is the person who's being sexually harassed. But being in a workplace with that kind of inappropriate behavior, could you imagine, even if you're not the one being sexually harassed, it hurts the entire workplace to have that kind of behavior go on. It does. You can't, even if you're not, involved in any way, even if it's happening across the room from you, even if it's happening across the room from you, it hurts you, right? It's going to make you nervous to come to work. It's going to be a distraction. It's going to be uncomfortable, right? You don't want that in your workplace, right? Sexual harassment should never go on. Never. It's not okay. It is not okay. It makes everyone uncomfortable. It makes everyone afraid. It traumatizes and makes the victim of it, horrifically treated, but it hurts all employees. So sexual harassment is a horrible thing. I believe Andrew Cuomo is guilty based on, these guys, they get so powerful, they think they can do anything. So I am not defending what he did, number one, and I'm not saying I don't think that he did it, because I believe it based on everything I've ever heard about Cuomo, based on the way he conducts himself, based on how powerful he is. I believe he did it. But there's a reason that they brought it up. There's a reason that they were relentless. There's a reason that Letitia James, was able to go ahead with this report. And I believe that this fight between the machine Democratic Party and the managerial, globalist, synthetic left, Malthusian Democratic Party, the social engineering Democratic Party versus the nepotistic bureaucracy, urban political machine Democratic Party, that this fight is real. This fight is on. Silicon Valley is buying up property in New York City like you wouldn't believe right now, right? Social media is where the power is. If you want to look at someone's influence and ability in this country, look how many Twitter followers they have. Look how many people are watching their YouTube videos. This fight is on. Silicon Valley, which is dominated by people who are Malthusian and think there are too many people in the world and think it is their duty to manage the useless eaters and decrease the population, that are systemically using their control over social media to push pessimism and self-hatred and depression. I mean, let's talk about how evil these people are. Let's talk about how evil the people running social media are, right? What's the guy at Facebook's name? What is his name again? The Facebook guy. What is his name again? His name is escaping. Right. What is his name? What is his name? The Facebook guy. Who's supposed to win? Trump or the synthetic left? Trump or Mark Zuckerberg. Every so often, some facts about these people. Thank you, everybody. Mark Zuckerberg. Every so often, some facts about these people surface. Right? Little details about these people make their way into the media. And sometimes it's things they want you to know, and sometimes it's things they don't want you to know. Okay? Now, a little detail about Mark Zuckerberg surfaced a couple of years back, and I have a feeling this is something that he did not want us to know. Who is Mark Zuckerberg's personal hero? Somebody already said it in the chat, right? Great minds think alike. Who is Mark Zuckerberg's personal hero? Augustus Caesar. Not Julius Caesar. Augustus Caesar. The first emperor of Rome. After Julius Caesar was stabbed to death, after the Roman Republic fell, Augustus Caesar became the emperor of Rome. And why does Mark Zuckerberg like Augustus Caesar? Why? Because of Pax Romana. Pax Romana. The Roman peace. The whole world, the whole known world at the time, was ruled by the Roman Empire. And so there was peace, because there was one ruler. And Mark Zuckerberg is personally obsessed with Augustus Caesar, because by ruling the whole world, he created peace. By getting, in the aftermath of the fall of the Roman Republic, when a populist and a fighter for the proletariat and for the working class, Julius Caesar, was stabbed to death, after the civil war that followed, Octavian was able to secure the throne for himself. Became the first emperor of Rome, Augustus Caesar. Augustus Caesar. And that is the hero of Mark Zuckerberg. And they're publishing documents about how there's too many people in the world. They're fantasizing about a great global explosion. They teamed up with the Hillary Clinton State Department to foment unrest during the Arab Spring and create chaos, destabilize Syria, destabilize Libya. Out of that, we got ISIS. They destabilized Honduras. They're fantasizing about a great correction. Among the circles of wealth and power. This is a part of the book, the bread tube book, that people don't read. Everyone, the people who don't like the bread tube book, I swear, they read chapter 1, and that's all they read. But chapter 4 of the bread tube book is very, very, very important. If you've read my book, Bread Tube Serves Imperialism, right? RedTube Serves Imperialism. Order your copy today. But if you've read it, chapter 4, Understanding Left Pessimism, is extremely important, because among the rich and powerful, pessimistic, libidinal ideology is very important. You can talk about George Sorel, right? The syndicalist who introduced a pessimistic perspective into Marxism and argued that things like the monarchy and mythology were important and that Marxism should be rooted in looking to the past, and talked about the birth strike. George Sorel. Right? George Sorel eventually, was an inspiration to Benito Mussolini and the Italian fascists. You can talk about Margaret Sanger, who traded socialism for sex, believed there were too many people in the world, tried to reduce the human population. Margaret Sanger, who was into eugenics, is the hero of Hillary Clinton. You can talk about Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, the occultist guru of the early 20th century, who said, "Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." You can talk about the Bohemian Grove. You know about the Bohemian Club, the Bohemian Grove, where they gather. It's a nude resort in California where they get together and talk among themselves. Read Marilyn Ferguson, right? Got a picture of her too. Marilyn Ferguson. That was the spiritual advisor to Al Gore and many members of Congress, tied to the CIA and the Stanford Research Institute. These people think there are too many people in the world. We've gotten out of balance with Mother Nature. The rabble are out of control. And it's time for a great cathartic release. It's time for a great cathartic release. It's time for a big explosion. It's time for a big boom that'll correct everything and put everything back into balance. It's time for the final scene of the Wagner opera, Götterdämmerung. It's time for the apocalypse. It's time for the world to burst into flames. It's time for everything to be corrected by one climactic, orgasmic, libidinal release of destruction. It's time for everything to shake. It's time for chaos and unrest and disturbance and all kinds of catastrophic events that will bring the world back into balance. It'll put Mother Nature back on top. It'll remind human beings that they've gone too far. This is what these people believe. They believe it's time for the enlightened ones, the great intellectuals, those destined to rule over others, to make sure that we, the rabble, never stand up and assert our rights. What those people believe is very scary. And it seems that the urban political machines have gotten in their way. The urban political machines, they don't care. Bill Gates cares, Jeff Bezos cares, Silicon Valley cares. There's a very, 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 very ugly fight going on in the Democratic Party between some very, very sinister people that have an agenda and care, and other forces that don't. And I think that Andrew Cuomo will be out, and he'll be replaced by a woke. He'll be replaced by a bread tuber. He'll be replaced by somebody who cares a lot more than he does. And that's not what we want. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you're a socialist, if you're an anti-racist, if you're an anti-imperialist, you're not part of the woke cult. If you're a socialist, you think that we need a government of action that will fight for working families. you're a socialist, you want to build things. You don't want to tear them down. If you're a socialist, you want jobs, healthcare, and education for all. If you're a socialist, you want to see strong working class communities. You want to see jobs and healthcare and schools. If you're a socialist, you want to get along with China and team up with China to tackle the problems the world faces, like poverty and hunger and war and drug gangs. You're a socialist, you want to get along with Venezuela and with Russia and with Cuba and with Iran. If you're a socialist, you want a better world. You want to bring people together, not tear them apart. If you're a socialist, you want the banks, factories, and industries to be organized to serve public good and not the profits of the rich. If you're a socialist, you want a government of action that will fight for working families. If you're a socialist, you are part of the city-building tendency in human history. If you're a socialist, you are an inheritor of the legacy of Socrates and Julius Caesar and Nelson Mandela. If you're a socialist, you are part of the tradition that raised Russia and China up from being deeply poor countries and made them into global superpowers. If you're a socialist, you are part of the tradition that defeated the Nazis. If you're a socialist, you are part of the tradition that invented space travel. If you're a socialist, you're a part of the tradition that has made 800 million people in China no longer poor, but part of the second largest economy in the world. If you are a socialist, you are a builder. You are a constructor. If you are a socialist, you are motivated by love, not hate. Not sexual frustration, not pessimism, but optimistic, constructive, revolutionary love. If you are a socialist, you are the opposite of Bill Gates. If you're a socialist, you're the opposite of Jeff Bezos. If you're a socialist, you're not a Democrat. You're not a Republican. If you're a socialist, you're a working class person who wants a better life for the people in their neighborhood, people in their country, people in their community. If you're a socialist, you're part of the city-building tendency in human history. And I'll conclude my opening remarks by reciting a piece of poetry I often recite. It was recited to me once, a long time ago, by a very old socialist activist. Goes like this. On a busy street in a busy town, I saw them tearing a building down. With a ho, heave, ho, and a lusty yell, the men swung a beam and a sidewall fell. So I said to the foreman, are these men skilled, like those you might hire if you wanted to build? And the foreman just smiled and said, no, indeed. Unskilled labor is all that I need. For I can easily wreck in a week or two that which took builders years to do. So I thought to myself as I walked away, which of these roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who builds with care, measuring life with a compass and square? Am I living my life by a well-made plan and striving to do the best that I can? Or am I that type that scours the town, content with the labor of tearing things down? And on that note, folks, names and locations. Names and locations, I will call you out as I see you, and then we'll go through these super chats. So names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us today? Names and locations. Ramsey, what country? Jeff in Los Angeles. Nate in Chicago. Cleveland Pirate Alex. California. Dylan. Leipzig, East Germany. Chaya in Montreal. So good to meet you, Chaya. Temple City, California. Joey from Belize. East Harlem, New York City, Nadia. Joey out in Jersey City. Joey is one of the John Brown volunteers. Joey is awesome. And if you want to help those John Brown volunteers, shoot him a Cash App, $ John Brown Volunteers. Shoot him a Venmo at John Brown Volunteers. We love you, Joey. We love the hard work that you're doing. Elias in Wisconsin. Char Darling in Nassau County, Lila in Dallas, Texas, Herb Bryant is with us, Randy from Detroit, Lexington, Massachusetts, St. David's, Bermuda, Cedar Park, Texas, Kansas City, Missouri, Los Angeles, Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn. When am I going to get to meet you guys, right? We're in the same borough. Ryan in Oakland, Miami, Florida, Matt in Baltimore, Vancouver, Canada, Cincinnati, Ohio, Clydebank, Vermont, Philly, North Carolina, Jorge, New York, New Jersey, Hawaii, Happy Valley, Oregon, Los Angeles, California, Sweden, Arizona, Alabama, Lloyd out in Queens, welcome. Mohsen from Iran, Tristan in Maryland, shout out to my good friend Tristan. Tristan is awesome. We love you, Tristan. Excellent citizen, George citizen, North Carolina, Tennessee, Galen in North Carolina, Oakland, Milos in Poland, Auckland, New Zealand, Herb Bryant out there in Tampa, Florida. Love you, Herb. Love you for what you do and for what you say and for being part of this community. Cliff in Tucson, Ohio, Loveland, Adelaide, Australia, Ben in Suffolk County, Providence, Rhode Island. I was out there a little while ago, a couple years ago I was out there. Kristen in Cleveland, Corona, California, John Witt in Houston, very good. JT24 in Mississippi. Terre Haute, Indiana. Tucson. East Coast Meetup. Jorge, New York, New Jersey. Montreal. Aberdeen, Scotland. Kieran from San Diego. South New Zealand. South Island. Mo in Toronto in Canada. Santa Barbara. Dunkachino. Austin, Texas. John in Denver. Arizona. Southeast UK. Peter from Poland. All right. Treasure Coast, Florida, Australia, West Coast, Los Angeles. Alan in Chicago, I missed you. Well, I didn't miss you this time. Iowa City, Kendall in San Diego, Naples, Florida, Harold Sullivan, great friend here. Robert Webb is eating a healthy lunch. Chile, Benjamin Johnston in Chile. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Vinicius in Brazil is with us. Welcome, Vinicius. Bradley Wasser in St. Louis. All right. Keep the super chats rolling in, folks. If you want me to answer a question, shoot me a super chat, and we'll start rolling. How do you explain real Marxism to the masses? Well, the first thing you have to do if you're talking with average people about Marxism is don't sound like a liberal. Do not sound like a liberal. Avoid anything that makes you sound like a liberal. And explain basic things like what is socialism? What is capitalism? What's a proletarian? What's a bourgeois? You have to grasp these concepts, right? You have to defend the historical legacy of socialism. You can't say, oh, that wasn't real socialism, right? Neo-Malthusianism, an anti-nuclear movement. Anti-nuclear movement. All right. And you don't sound like a liberal. Say, and explain the concepts clearly. Use analogies from everyday life. Talk about corruption. Talk about the government. Point to examples people can understand. And the more you can understand socialism, the more you really understand it, the more you're able to explain it. And that's true with any concept. The more you really understand something, the more you can explain it. That's why Vosh is so bad, because he doesn't really understand this stuff, right? But the more you really understand it, the better you can explain it. All right. Marxism as a ripoff of Christianity. Well, it's funny because there was somebody in my family who was part of a religious group that they argued that communism was the Antichrist because it sought to build heaven on earth without God. And that is actually a common critique of Marxism from religious fundamentalists, that look, Marxism promises to restore the Garden of Eden, carry out, the Armageddon, and, have a gigantic battle against evil and create a world where there is no hunger and suffering. it's promising to carry out, the final mission and, without God. It's an atheist secular ideology that is trying to deliver what only God can deliver, and that's why it is the Antichrist. I believe some of the Jesus freaks in the 1960s, right? I'm not using that as a derogatory term. In the 60s, there was one variant of hippies that you could call Jesus freaks. They would play their guitars and sing songs about Jesus, long-haired, rock and roll listening people who happened to be religious. Liberals seem to be warming up to the idea of violence and internment camps for the unvaccinated. All right, violence for unvaccinated. They were hippies who were really into Christianity. And as the 70s went on, a lot of Jesus freaks became neocons on the basis of that, which is very interesting. And I've written a lot about the religious right and its origins and et cetera. And it's something I've studied a lot about, having grown up in a small town where the religious right was the majority by far. I mean, evangelical conservatives, fundamentalist Christians were the majority of people I grew up around. Jackson Hinkle and Haas discussed having a stream with you the other night. Would be terrific. Wow, okay. I would love that, Jackson and Haas stream. Writing it down. Having grown up, I'm very fascinated by the origins of the Christian religious right. A lot of, Jesus freaks, 1960s hippies who were ultra-religious eventually became neocons on the basis of this kind of belief that Marxism is offering what Christianity offers. However, it's offering it in a godless way, so therefore it is satanic. And that, interestingly enough, sometimes Roman Catholics will say that. You'll get some of that in Catholic theology even. I would disagree with it, and my take on it is a little bit different. My take on it is this, that Christianity emerged as one of many different religious sects that existed in Palestine. At the time, Palestine was, controlled by the Roman Empire, was part of the Roman Empire. It was imported into the city of Rome, and in the city of Rome, it became a vehicle for the Roman proletariat to express its wishes. And this is what Karl Kautsky writes in his book, The Foundations of Christianity. Right? Rome was the first place in the world you had the proletarian class, those with nothing to sell but their labor power. Right? They sold their labor power to a boss. They didn't own any land, but they didn't own any property. They didn't own any slaves, but they were not slaves themselves. They were neither slaves nor masters. And in Rome, you had proletarians, and that Christianity was largely the religious expression of the proletariat, right? That the proletariat, the way Rome worked, by the way, in Roman society, you had what were called mystery cults or mystery religions. Rome had its official gods, Jupiter, Venus, etc. But it also was constantly importing different religious groups from around the country, from around the empire. For example, it had, there was the cult of Isis, and that's not, the Islamic State or whatever. That's Isis, the ancient Egyptian goddess, right? And there was the cult of Isis. And there was, that was big. You had the cult of Mithra was big. And that, in the Roman Navy, for example, they worshipped the god of the ocean, Poseidon, something like that. And they had their own rituals and their own ceremonies to worship Poseidon. And there were different Roman military orders, sections of the Roman military that had their own gods, right? Romans who really liked to party and dance and celebrate, they worshipped Dionysus. Right? They had the cult of Dionysus. And that the way Roman society worked is if you had a group in Roman society that had its own interests or did its own thing or wanted to assert itself, the way you organized yourself is you started a cult or a mystery, right? That's generally what happened, is that the Romans, if your group wanted to assert its power, you started a cult, right? Or a mystery religion that would be to assert your group's interests. And so just like the Navy had the cult of Poseidon, just like the people that wanted to have parties and have orgies had the cult of Dionysus, the proletarians, the craftsmen, the carpenters, the pipe fitters, the blacksmiths, the proletarians of Rome, their mystery religion was Christianity. They worshipped Jesus of Nazareth. And originally it was only for Jewish proletarians, right? Originally it was a Jewish-only religion, but then Paul came along, and you read in the New Testament, he said you can be circumcised in the Spirit, right? Meaning that you don't have to actually be circumcised, and it's not just for Jews, it's for all mankind. And Christianity eventually became this religion for Roman proletarians. And it was the mystery religion around which the Roman proletariat could fight for its rights. There was not very much science back in those days. There was not sociology and anthropology. And so if you had a group in society, you didn't start a political movement to seize the means of production. You started a mystery religion. That's how groups in Rome organized themselves. And so I wouldn't argue that Marxism is a ripoff of Christianity. I would say that what Christianity was in Rome, Marxism is in 21st century America, or 21st century the world. That's my argument, that basically just like the proletariat in Rome asserted itself with Christianity by building the church and fighting for its rights, nowadays, in modern capitalism, the proletariat asserts itself through the working class movement and through Marxism, and through the labor movement, through socialism, etc. So I would argue that they are the same thing. They're really the same thing. One is a religious expression of it 2,000 years ago. The other is a more scientific expression of it in modernity. But they're ultimately the same movement. It is the movement for the liberation of the proletariat. Will Andrew Yang rebound? I don't know. If Andrew Yang is going to rebound, he needs to reinvent himself, because when he ran for mayor of New York, he bored the crap out of me. Andrew Yang was very exciting when he ran for president. He was awesome. The math hats, and I went to an Andrew Yang rally. Go watch my video interviewing people at those Andrew Yang rallies. He attracted some very smart, dedicated people. Andrew Yang was very cool when he first ran, for president, and when he ran for mayor of New York, I could barely listen to him. He bored the crap out of me so much. He just sounded like every other politician. So if Andrew Yang is going to rebound, he needs to get interesting again. That's what he needs to do. He needs to somehow become interesting, because, I could care less about Andrew Yang at this point. Unless he starts talking interestingly again, I'm not interested. All right. What would a mass mobilization to rebuild the country look like? Well, it would be millions and millions of unemployed people getting hired to start paving roads, fixing bridges, building high-speed railway, building and cleaning up the universities, building new schools and hospitals, and power plants, water treatment facilities. It would be a brain trust of some of the skilled engineers and scientists mapping out a 5-year plan to rebuild the United States. That's what the United States, that's what a mass mobilization to rebuild the country would look like. It would be a mass construction project to update the country. Every section of this country should have high-speed, accessible Wi-Fi. There should be no cell phone dead zones in the United States of America. Shouldn't happen. There shouldn't be parts of this country that are unpaving the roads. Shouldn't be happening. We should have paved roads everywhere in the United States. No more gravel roads. They should be paving the gravel roads in rural areas, not unpaving the roads. I would need new fire departments and new emergency room hospitals in places that don't have it, right? A mass mobilization to rebuild the country. Again, it would be high-speed railway connecting the South and the Midwest to the coasts, right? So that you could get on a train, in Boston, and, in a couple hours, you could be in Chicago, or you could be in Iowa, right? It would be giving access to the more remote parts of this country, to the coasts and connecting them. So there you go. It would be a tech upgrade too, I would think. So there you go. Christian communists in history. Okay. Why do we talk about religion on here so much? I mean, I'm willing to talk about it. But it's interesting that so many of the super chats are about that. But, I guess maybe I'm willing to talk about it, other people aren't. So there you go. Christian communists throughout history. Daniel Ortega, the leader of the Nicaraguan Revolution. Very, very Christian and very, very communist. What other examples could I give? What else? Hugo Chavez. Nicolas Maduro. Who else? Evo Morales, out of the movement to the masses. Evo Morales. Fidel Castro. Right, he converted in the final years of his life. Right, in the 1990s, he met with the Pope and converted to Christianity. Fidel Castro, I would say, is a Christian. For most of his life, he was an atheist, but he did accept Christ, in the 90s. You're asking me about great Christian communists throughout history. There you go. So anyway, all righty. There you go. I guess a lot in Latin America. So there you go. All righty. But there were some others, like, Father Roy Bourgeois, right? And, there were some of those progressive priests, that were involved in the 1960s civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. Yeah, there you go. All righty. Great. Countries that have eliminated homelessness. Well, this is really interesting. I'll never forget this. One time I was in a bar with a friend. We were two communists. We're in a bar in New York City. There's a guy, and we're talking to him. My goodness, another religion question. Why do atheist? Jim Jones. Jesus, a lot of questions here. All right, very good. And I was in a bar, and there was a guy from Belarus. And I remember we were talking to, we're communists or whatever, and he's like, oh, I'm from Belarus. Lukashenko is a communist. It's awful. And we said, well, Lukashenko, doesn't he done a lot for Belarus? Isn't it better off than some of the other countries after the fall of the USSR? We're talking. And he said to us, Belarus, Venezuela, and Cuba are all the same, he said. And we said, okay. And he said, in Belarus and Venezuela and in Cuba, they have no homeless people. And he said, but you know why that is? And we said, why? And he said, because they put them all in mental hospitals. That's what this Belarusian guy said. He said, you go to Belarus, yeah, they always brag, we have no homeless people in Belarus, because that's because they put them all in mental hospitals. You go to Cuba, they always say, oh, we have no homeless people in Cuba. That's because they put them all in mental hospitals. He said Venezuela too, which it's not exactly like that in Venezuela, but whatever. And I remember I said to him, well, if you're guaranteed a house by the government and you're still homeless, maybe you should be in a mental hospital. If you think about it, in Cuba, every citizen is guaranteed the right to housing by the government, and their rent cannot be more than 10% of their income. And after they live there for like 5 years, they become the owners of it. Did you know that? Cuba has a very high rate of homeownership because your rent cannot be more than 10% of your income, and after you've been there for 5 years, you own it. But are there people in Cuba who have guaranteed housing but still live on the street and eat out of garbage cans? Yes. And those people, probably belong in a mental hospital. They need help, right? If you're at the point where you're guaranteed housing by the state and you're still, walking around talking to yourself and, eating out of a garbage can and stuff, you'd probably need some help. And then, it's like that in Belarus, right? You're guaranteed housing by the state, but if you're still living on the street, it means you need some help, right? I.O. Hillary says these are people with mental disorders. And that is correct. So, you could say that Cuba has eliminated homelessness. You could say that Belarus has eliminated homelessness. But, there are still occasionally people who, are schizophrenic or, whatever, and that's a different situation. But yes, ultimately the socialist countries have eradicated homelessness for the most part. You sometimes have a layer of people, and as that man from Belarus made clear, they say there's no homeless people, but they put them all in mental hospitals. Well, that's different. That's very different than the United States, where we have all kinds of empty houses and all kinds of homeless people becoming homeless during the pandemic. It's a different situation entirely. All right. How do Marxists understand modernity? Well, here's the thing. So when you talk about modernity, again, I know that there's a lot of philosophical conversation about the concept of modernity. So I'm not doing that justice here. But what I understand modernity to be is that during the French Revolution, there was a figure, I forget which figure, said, this is the birth of the modern world. And the era of, post overthrow of feudalism, French Revolution, American Revolution, 1800s to now is called the modern era, right? And I think the modern era ended in like the 50s, right? Or World War II. From like the 1800s up until World War II, they call that the modern era, right? And they call fascism and communism are modernist ideologies, right? And modernism is belief in historical progress. Modernism is, people wanting to go out and build, and science fiction and all of that. And that postmodernism is people who say, no. Look what happened in the modern era. We got World War II, we got evil Stalin, and we went too far. And modernity believes in objective truth. Modernity believes in ideology. And we're going to get beyond the errors of modernity. We're going to argue that instead of one ideology defining everything, that it's competing narratives, and that the truth is when different narratives compete and people hear each other in dialogue. And we're going to argue that historical progress is a totalitarian myth, and that modernist ideology, right? They say fascism and communism are the modernist ideologies, and that postmodernism is saying that, look what happened with modernity. Modernity led to awful World War II and awful Stalin and awful repression and polluting the environment. And we need to get beyond modernity because modernity is toxic and dangerous. It is looking at modernity and saying modernity is an illusion, etc. And that's my understanding of what the debate around modernity is. And I would argue that what we call modernity, right? The belief in historical progress, the belief in an ideology, having an ideology that motivates you to go out and do things, humans working together to achieve things. I would argue that is universal. I don't think that's, I think that people thought that in ancient Greece, except the ideology that held them together was very different. And, the things that people, the structure of the society was very different. But a lot of things that get labeled as modernity are really universal to healthy civilizations. They're universal to healthy civilizations. It's just when societies are healthy, people believe in an ideology. People know who they are. Ideology is, imagine you're in a car, right? Imagine you're going somewhere in a car. When you're driving, you know where you came from, you know where you're going, you know how you're getting there. That's what ideology is. And every society has an ideology. So ideologies are not unique to modernity. Ideologies exist in all healthy societies. And when a society has no clear ideology, when it has no clear ideology, a society comes apart. The Roman Empire at the beginning had a very clear ideology. But after a while, it started coming apart because they didn't have a clear ideology, right? And when societies don't have a clear ideology, they fall apart, right? And that what we label as modernity is just societies being somewhat healthy, right? And that when societies start to come apart, when people start to argue there is no truth, when people don't know who they are, don't know where they're going, when people are not coming together and working for a common cause, that's society coming apart. That's not just getting over the horrors of toxicity of modernity. And that's where I would disagree with postmodernists. Okay, all right, who's going to win, Trump or the synthetic left? Look, I was talking to a good friend of mine last night. This good friend of mine was telling me about someone else we know, and this person that we know is, I don't know, folks, sometimes there are people that are a little off. They're just a little bit off. But because they're a little bit off, they're tuned into things that you're not. And it's really hard to explain, right? Maybe it's connected to how a lot of like really great artists and scientists are mentally ill. Maybe it's because, maybe it's connected, maybe it's connected with the fact that because they're not tuned in socially and they can't get along with people, and they're, the pros, cons of first 5-year plan. Maybe they're not tuned in to, they don't get along with other people, and because they're not tuned in to how other people see things, they're able to pay attention to stuff that you'd be distracted by hearing other people. But I think we all, maybe we don't, but I've known a lot of people who are a little bit off, okay? They have trouble holding a job, they have trouble with maintaining relationships, but they are really tuned in to world events, they're really tuned into stuff, and that gives them the ability to notice trends and patterns that other people do not notice. Right? It's almost like a dog whistle, right? Not the political sense of the term, but like a literal dog whistle, right? There's this whistle that you blow into. Humans blow into it. We don't hear anything because the whistling sound that comes out is at a frequency that a dog hears it, but people don't. And when you blow into it, the dog jumps, because his ears are different than our ears. The dog's ears are different than ours. And the dog is tuned into that frequency, whereas we are not. We cannot hear those frequencies. Well, that applies to, you'll meet people that have a lot of social difficulties sometimes, that, but you listen to them and they will be able to tell you years in advance what's going to happen. They are tuned into the economy. They are tuned into world events in ways that we're not. And I was talking to a mutual friend of mine who knows somebody who's like that. And that person, I heard secondhand, that person made a prediction about this very super chat I was just asked about Trump and the synthetic left, who will win. This person said Trump. Well, not Trump, but the right wing. And they said the right wing in the United States is tougher. And when shit gets real, the right wing has a lot of people who will die for it, and the left, the synthetic left, doesn't. And I think, that seems like common sense, actually. If you look at U.S. society today, yes, there are probably more anti-Trump people than Trump people. That's true. The media and the establishment, there are more people who don't like Trump, there are more people that don't like QAnon than there are QAnon people, by a lot. But when shit gets real, which we really hope it doesn't, we really, 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 really hope it doesn't for a long time, because you don't want to be living in a country when stuff gets real like that. You don't want to be living in a country during a civil war. But if there were to be some kind of civil war situation, the right wing would win hands down. That was the person's observation. And it's like, duh, it's common sense, right? Yeah, that's true. If there were to be a civil war today between the left and the right in the United States, the right it wouldn't last a week. The right would just come in and kick everybody's ass. Okay? The right wing would just roll right over the left. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Look at the left and look at the right. It wouldn't even be a contest. Let's face it. The right wing would win. And that's why, in the BreadTube book, I specifically call out the Antifa types, because they are trying to escalate to some kind of armed confrontation with the right wing. Why in the world would you do that? They say quit while you're ahead. Why in the world would you try to start some kind of armed confrontation? Right now, it would be the dumbest thing you could possibly do, because the right wing would just roll over the left. It would just roll right over them. Because the left doesn't believe in strength. Strength is triggering. Strength is fascist, don't you know, right? And the left doesn't have an ideology, because ideology is fascist and totalitarian. The left has embraced postmodernism. They don't believe in anything. They don't believe in truth. They don't believe in strength. They don't believe in working together for a common cause. They just sitting on the internet being pessimistic, right? And the right, they believe in stuff. What they believe in is wrong. QAnon is wrong. Libertarianism is wrong. Racism is wrong. But they actually believe in this stuff. Whereas the left doesn't believe in anything except that if you believe in something, you're a Nazi. So yeah, if there was a fight today between people in the Trump camp and in the right-wing camp and the synthetic left would win. Unless leftism changes drastically, unless we get a constructive, optimistic socialism, that's the guaranteed outcome. The right will eventually win because, that's it. Now there's a generational problem on the right, right? The right tends to be older folks, right? And, that's what Proud Boys and all of that is about. Proud Boys is very much, an appeal to, the right wing, but it's for younger folks. And the right is trying to figure out their generational issue. But apparently they're doing better. The right wing is doing better with Zoomers than it is among millennials, interestingly enough. As the Zoomers come up, they have more right-wing tendencies than you would expect. You'd think they'd be even more liberal than the Zoomers. Nope. So there you go. Neo-Malthusianism and the anti-nuclear movement. Well, yes. I mean, who is the biggest enemy of nuclear power? Big oil. And, the Rockefeller family are Neo-Malthusians. And yes, I believe that the answer to climate change is getting beyond fossil fuels, building Fusion City. But the anti-nuclear movement, would argue that the answer is going backwards and we have too much stuff. And so that's the connection there. All right. This person super chats, they say violence and internment camps for the unvaccinated. That's a bit of an exaggeration, I would say. I mean, yes, they're about to make rules here in New York City that if you're not vaccinated, you can't go into restaurants, you can't go into gyms. And there is kind of a hatred for people that are not vaccinated on social media. Well, I'm vaccinated. My wife is vaccinated. Everyone I work with is vaccinated. But there are some people who are not vaccinated. And as much as I don't agree with them, I don't like the castigation of them. I don't like this idea that they're Satan, that they're evil, they're bad people. They're not. The U.S. government lies all the time. Is it wrong that they might suspect that the U.S. government's lying about this? I mean, the pandemic has wrecked the economy and destroyed the lives of a lot of working class people. So why should they trust that the fact that Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos have made out like bandits during it? I mean, look, if you want to, the anti-vaxxers, who I blame for the anti-vaxxers? I blame the U.S. government for the anti-vaxxers. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I think vaccines are good. But the anti-vax movement is very much the little boy who cried wolf. You ever hear the story of the little boy who cried wolf? All right, there's a little boy. He's a shepherd boy. He's taking care of some sheep. And he's bored one day. And so, he has the idea to get some attention. He shouts, wolf, wolf. All the people come. And there's no wolf there. They go home. Another time, little boy, he's bored. And he shouts, wolf, wolf. And the people come to rescue him from the wolf, and there's no wolf. They all go home. Well, he does this a few times, and then an actual wolf does show up to eat his sheep, and he shouts, wolf, wolf, and nobody comes because they've been lied to so many times. That's the anti-vax movement. We're in a situation where people need to get vaccinated. But the U.S. government has lied so many times. You're going to die from Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. Wolf, wolf. Didn't happen. Al-Qaeda is going to blow up your house unless George W. Bush gets reelected president. Wolf, what? Didn't happen. Killer bees are coming for you. Oh my God, you're going to die from the killer bees. Wolf, wolf. Didn't happen. And so now we're in a situation where COVID-19 is real. It exists. And there's a lot of people who go, nah, I don't buy it. I don't trust you. And they see that it's been beneficial to some people economically while hurting others, and they're skeptical. Well, they're wrong, okay? COVID-19 is not fake. It's not a hoax. It's a real disease. Trust me, I had it at one point. I know it's real. The vaccine, is not going to kill you. It's not dangerous, but I don't blame these people for being skeptical. In fact, I kind of admire how skeptical they are on some level. I mean, I wish they would just take the vaccine. I don't think they would lose anything by taking it. But I don't, again, we're the left. We're supposed to be people that question the status quo, right? That's what these folks don't get. We're supposed to be, and isn't it a shame that people are questioning the status quo in this anti-scientific way? Wouldn't it be better if people were questioning the status quo and becoming socialists and communists? But instead, the socialists and communists are just, that's just a postgraduate phase or whatever. So I don't blame these people for being skeptical. I really don't. I blame the U.S. government for lying so many times and setting people up not to believe them. I blame, them for mishandling the pandemic and economically destroying people, putting them into a state of distrust even more. I wish those folks would get vaccinated, but, I don't think that morally shaming them and telling them they're bad people is going to help. And I also, again, if the U.S. government were trustworthy, if the U.S. government were trustworthy and they were just saying that, it's one thing, but, the U.S. government does lie a lot. So there you go. I would love to stream with Jackson and Haas, Jackson Hinkle and Haas. That would be an awesome stream. I would love to do it. I didn't know that they talked about it. That would be awesome. I would love to stream with them. They're great folks, great people. They are great people. They are great folks. I would stream with them anytime. Oh my God, it would be amazing. I'm Donald Trump. It would be awesome. It would be the most tremendous stream ever. If you had me on there with Jackson Hinkle and Haas, it would be tremendous. It would be amazing. Oh my God, no one would ever have a stream as good as the one that I would do. It would be awesome. It would be awesome. Awesome. That was my Donald Trump impression. All righty. Out of the movement to the masses. Absolutely. Get out of the protest cage. Get to the masses. Get to the masses already, right? There's average Americans who are ready to hear socialism. Stop trying to, maneuver within the CPUSA. Some people think I'm trying to take over the CPUSA. I am not. I am not interested in taking over the Communist Party. I'm not interested in taking over the Communist Party or the Workers' World Party or the Socialist Workers' Party or the Socialist Labor Party or the ISO or the QWH or the XYZ. I'm interested in getting out of the movement into the masses. Why do the communist parties of the world remain atheist? Well, first of all, they don't, right? Most communist parties in the world will allow people of religious faith to join. They consider religion to be a personal matter. But also let me add that the manufacturing consent, the CPs of the world are not the vanguard of the socialist movement. I mean, in China and in Vietnam they are. But if you go to Peru, are people joining the Communist Party of Peru? No, they're joining Peru Libre. Right? If you go to Venezuela, are people joining the Communist Party of Venezuela? No, they're joining the PSUV. The Third International, the Comintern apparatus, it's very important, but it's not, it's not like the center of gravity in global socialism anymore. There's a lot of anti-imperialist groups and socialist groups out there. They are one current, right? The ML current that's grouped around, the CPs of the world, the communist parties of the world. They exist, but they're not the only ones. So there you go. All right. The Jim Jones cult disproves socialism. What? I mean, I don't know. I mean, the Jim Jones group, for those of you who don't know, in 1978, there was a religious group in the United States called the People's Temple, and it was started by Reverend Jim Jones, and Reverend Jim Jones was, he was from Indiana. He was a white guy, but it was a kind of a Pentecostal religious group, and it was mostly black people that were in the group. Reverend Jim Jones was white. He actually had the first interracial adoption in the state of Indiana, and they were a religious group, and at one point they moved to Ukiah, California, because they thought it would be safe during a nuclear war, and then they moved to San Francisco in the 70s. And they were, they kind of reinvented themselves several times, but in the 1970s, they were claiming to be kind of like Christian communists or something. But they always they rubbed people the wrong way. They were kind of an authoritarian religious group. MPP. They were, they were authoritarian, and, people were threatened if they left. And faith healing was a big part of what they did. And I'm sorry, any group that is doing that, I'm not okay with. Faith healing. They would fake healings, basically. They pretended that their leader, Reverend Jim Jones, had magical powers and could heal people and stuff, and he couldn't. They would stage it. That's disgusting. That's despicable. It's absolutely despicable, right? But they would do fake healings where they would, have someone show up in a wheelchair who could walk, and he would, do magic, and they would like stand up, and, it was, you know what I mean? I'm sorry. I don't approve. Any group that's doing that, that's despicable. Anyone who hates their followers that much, they would lie to them on that level, is just utterly despicable in my book. And, I know Angela Davis was a member of the People's Temple, like symbolically was a member, and so was Huey Newton. And, they hung out with Jim Jones, and they were pro-Soviet, and they said pro-Soviet stuff. So because of that, okay, it's mixed, all right? Jim Jones, for whatever reason, they were anti-imperialist, and they were sympathetic to the Soviet Union and Cuba and stuff. But everything I've ever read about them rubs me the wrong way. And then ultimately the mass suicide, the fact that then 1,000 of them drank cyanide and killed themselves in Guyana. Everything about the group is just, gross, and you just can't read too much about it. It just kind of makes you, every so often I'll get on a kick and I'll want to read more about the People's Temple, and then I'll just start to get grossed out. It just rubs me the wrong way. Everything about them just kind of rubs me the wrong way. You can listen. Jim Jones has sermons you can listen to on the internet. They have I think it's the Jonestown Research, and you listen to this guy talk. Every sermon has one topic, himself, and he just is on there talking about how amazing he is. It's just like chronic level narcissism, and the whole thing is just kind of ew. The whole thing just kind of ugh. It just, I don't know. The more you read about People's Temple, the more you just kind of, ugh, right? They had elaborate punishment rituals in the church, where they would make people box with each other, and the more you read about it, the more you just, ugh, it's not. And what is weird, though, is you would think that, when I was a kid in school, we learned about it. It's a very famous incident in U.S. history, the Jonestown Massacre, the mass suicide in Guyana. You would think that they would say, see, this proves that communism's evil. They don't, which is weird, right? And there's some people who think maybe they didn't kill the Congress. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about Jonestown, but the more you read into it, the more you just think, this is how insane the fight between the ruling class was, basically. There was a fight in the ruling class. There were a lot of counter gangs that were set up, right? It was, spy versus spy, FBI versus CIA, the Reagan faction versus the Eastern establishment, and, that period, right, that this happened in. You're talking 1978, 79, 1980, 1981. A lot of stuff was happening. Those 4 years, there was a big fight in the ruling class, right? The Carter-Brzezinski faction was fighting against Ronald Reagan and the neocons. And there were every counter gang, David Duke. That's when David Duke became the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan and was leading, this revival of the KKK, and was on TV with Phil Donahue promoting the KKK. That's when the Greensboro Massacre of 1979 happened. That's when the RCP had their crazy attack on the White House with Deng Xiaoping and all of that. The more you look into this period, like the late Carter administration, the ruling class were at war with each other. And, Jim Jones fit into that somehow. He was very close with the Democratic Party in San Francisco. He was actually the housing director of San Francisco. And believe that or not only did he have this crazy religious group, but he was the housing director. And look, again, it was spy versus spy. It was counter gang versus counter gang. It was fourth generation warfare between factions of the U.S. ruling class. And, Jim Jones fit into that. And I don't know who was using him for what. I mean, I know George Moscone and Harvey Milk, they were very close to him and probably wouldn't have gotten elected to San Francisco politics if they hadn't had an alliance with Jim Jones. So it's complicated. The Jim Jones stuff is complicated, but that was how crazy things had gotten in the United States at that time. There was a fight in the ruling class. David Duke was doing his thing. The RCP was doing their thing. The Moonies were doing their thing. The Jim Jones people were doing their thing. And there was a fight in the ruling class. And that's one ugly, horrific incident that happened. There was, Project MK Ultra, and we're, again, there was kind of, there was a little bit of stability, the Reagan years, the 90s, but now we're re-entering a period where there's going to be that level of instability again, and we're seeing it again. So that's, I don't know, maybe there's stuff we can learn from that period, but like I said, every time I start reading about the Jonestown stuff, it's just, ugh. All right. Pros and cons of the first 5-year plan in the Soviet Union. Well, the pros was how rapidly they did it. They had the 5-year plan in 4 years. They rapidly industrialized. I'd say the weakness was in agriculture. The collectivization was a mess. I mean, it was a mess by all accounts. I mean, they ultimately created the collective farm system, which was a success. But the process, the Holodomor and all that was a mess. A lot of people died, and they rapidly transitioned from private agriculture to collective agriculture in the context of a famine. And that was pretty bad. So there you go. All righty. Manufacturing Consent. It's a great Noam Chomsky book. It's a great movie. Noam Chomsky is problematic in some ways, but I think Manufacturing Consent, the movie and the book, I learned a lot from it. This is where people start. This is people's introduction to radical politics, and, I learned a lot from that stuff. So there you go. All right. The movement for a People's Party. Is it the same old stuff? Same old stuff. No, we'll see what happens. I like it. I think but we'll see what comes out of it. It's too soon to tell. There's a story about during the 1970s, Zhou Enlai, the foreign minister of China. They asked him, what do you think of the French Revolution? And he said, it's too soon to tell, right? Well, they have a long view of history. It's too soon to tell. Who knows? I like Cornel West. I like Jimmy Dore. And if they're able to get something good that comes out of it, great. They're not the first to have attempted to form a new party outside the Democrats, but we'll see. We are in very different times than we used to be. What happened at the 2016 Democratic Convention was very different than anything that's ever happened in my lifetime. We shall see. We shall see. All right, folks. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. How much do you feel the petrodollar and the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia impacts U.S. imperialism today? Well, read my book, Oil and the Global Capitalist Crisis. Oil is the central commodity in the world economy, all right? We have an oil-based global order. Saudi Arabia is an integral part of that. And the way the Western capitalists dominate the world is through their control of the oil markets. ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron, the 4 super majors, that they are the most powerful forces in the world economy. They're the biggest banks. The petro bankers, the oil bankers, are the most powerful people in the United States at this time, and in the world really at this time. And so, Saudi Arabia and the petrodollar and all of that is integral to U.S. domination of the planet. No question about it. Go watch my presentation in Brazil, or go read the book Oil and the Capitalist Crisis. All right, one more time. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. The people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Fusion City now. Fusion City now. Fusion City now. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Good night, everybody. Good night.